So, friends, in a last-minute presidential move, President Joe Biden decided to pardon some innocent folk, people who committed no crimes, to try to protect them against baseless, bad faith prosecutions by Donald Trump. Two questions. One, how effective are these pardons in protecting people against Donald Trump's vindictiveness? And two, what are the possible consequences and long-term implications of a practice that involves pardoning the innocent? Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, pardoning the innocent to prevent Donald Trump from bringing baseless, bad faith, vindictive prosecutions against his perceived enemies feels good in the moment. But we can't ignore the long-term implications and the downside of this practice moving forward. But let's start with the brand new CNN reporting on these last-minute President Joe Biden pardons. Headline, Biden issues preemptive pardons for Trump critics and Biden family members. And that article begins, President Joe Biden on Monday issued an extraordinary slate of preemptive pardons for prominent critics of President-elect Donald Trump and members of his own family, using executive prerogative as a shield against revenge by his incoming successor, while also guaranteeing his closest relatives aren't subject to future prosecutions. Clemency, another word for a pardon, for General Mark Millie, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and members of Congress who served on the committee investigating the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, was announced early Monday morning. Later, minutes before Trump was to be inaugurated as the nation's 47th president, Biden also issued pardons for members of his family, his brothers James and Frank, his sister Valerie, and their respective spouses. The pardons, coming in the final hours of Biden's presidency, amounted to a stunning flex of presidential power that is unprecedented in recent presidential history. They serve to protect, and friends, please put a pin in that. The pardons serve to protect the people pardoned. That's going to be pin number one. They serve to protect several outspoken critics of the incoming president, including former Republican Representative Liz Cheney, whom Trump has vowed retribution against. But they also protect Biden's close family members and potentially establish a new precedent. Pin number two, the pardons potentially establish a new precedent that the new president, that would be Donald Trump, will use to protect his own allies from criminal prosecution. This quote from President Biden, quote, "My family has been subjected to unrelenting attacks and threats motivated solely by a desire to hurt me, the worst kind of partisan politics. Unfortunately, I have no reason to believe these attacks will end," Biden said in a statement released as the inauguration ceremony was underway at the U.S. Capitol. Biden's extraordinary decision to announce pardons for multiple family members in his final minutes as president was fueled, in part, by Trump's public vow to appoint a special prosecutor to go after Biden and his family, according to a source familiar with his thinking. Quote, "Even when individuals have done nothing wrong and will ultimately be exonerated, the mere fact of being investigated or prosecuted can irreparably damage their reputations and finances," the outgoing president said. A statement earlier in the day said Biden in good conscience, could not stand aside with the threat of reprisals by the incoming president against his adversaries. Quote, "These are exceptional circumstances, and I cannot, in good conscience, do nothing," Biden wrote in a statement about the initial batch of pardons issued hours before he was set to welcome Trump to the White House for tea before attending his swearing in. Quote, "Baseless and politically motivated investigations wreak havoc on the lives, safety, and financial security of targeted individuals and their families." Quote, "The issuance of these pardons should not be mistaken as an acknowledgement that any individual engaged in wrongdoing, nor should acceptance be misconstrued as an admission of guilt for any offense. Our nation owes these public servants a debt of gratitude for their tireless commitment to our country," he wrote. As he weighed preemptive pardons over the past several days, the president has made clear in conversations with aides that he does not believe those who received them were guilty of any crimes, and voiced concern that pardoning them could connote guilt, according to people familiar with the conversations. Friends, let's drop pin number 3 right there, and I promise we're going to circle back to all 3 of these pins. The article continues. Ultimately, Biden put aside those concerns with the view that providing protection would outweigh the potential implication of guilt. Okay, friends, let's circle back to the 3 pins. Pin number 1. These pardons will serve to protect people. That's true. But from what? Well, when Joe Biden delivers a pardon to an innocent person, let's say Liz Cheney, it will protect Representative Cheney from being tried, convicted, sentenced, imprisoned. Of course, none of that should happen because there's no evidence she committed a crime. Setting that aside, the pardon will protect her against being prosecuted. But you know what it won't protect her against? Trump's other vindictiveness, other avenues of retribution he will have available to him as president, like he can order his Department of Justice to conduct criminal investigations of Liz Cheney, even if she can't be indicted and prosecuted. And, you know, the argument may go something like this. Well, Liz Cheney was part of a conspiracy, and some of the other conspirators don't have presidential pardons, so they can be prosecuted. So we have to investigate all of the conspirators, including Liz Cheney and all of the other members of the J6 committee who received pardons. And that will cost Liz Cheney dearly in legal fees, in stress and anxiety, though she is very tough, and in potential further reputational harm at the hands of a nefarious president. She can still be investigated. You know what else Donald Trump could do? He could launch vindictive, bad faith tax audits, because that is not necessarily impacted by the fact that Liz Cheney has a presidential pardon. She can still be audited by Donald Trump's Internal Revenue Service. She could also be dragged through congressional hearings and be forced to incur all sorts of legal expenses and, stress, anxiety, reputational harm, etc. So, what do these presidential pardons really protect the pardon recipient from? A prosecution, but not all of those other things, all of those other vindictive avenues, that retribution Donald Trump might pursue. Pin number 2. This will potentially set a precedent that Trump will use in the future. And it might go something like this. At the end of his 4-year term, Donald Trump might say, I will be following Joe Biden's precedent by issuing pardons to all of my executive branch officials, even though they've done nothing wrong. They're actually innocent. Joe Biden set the precedent, at least the atmospheric and procedural precedent, not really legal precedent. It takes an appellate court to decide an issue. to create actual legal precedent, but Joe Biden set a procedural precedent of issuing pardons to a bunch of innocent folks. So Donald Trump will say, I have to do the same thing now that I'm leaving office. And he can grant, wholesale prophylactic pardons to all of his cabinet officials, all of his administration members. And let's take that possibility, that thought experiment, one step further. Might Donald Trump say today, tomorrow, the next day, okay, in recognition that Joe Biden issued pardons to a whole bunch of folks he claims are innocent, Trump, of course, won't accept the premise that they're innocent, but they are innocent. They've committed no crimes. But because Joe Biden has issued pardons to the innocent, I am announcing that 4 years from now, on the last day of my presidential term, I will be issuing pardons to all of my cabinet officials and my executive branch officials. And that way, he will be sending the signal to everybody in his administration that it's a damn free-for-all. You can commit all the crimes you want for the next 4 years because following Joe Biden's lead, I will be pardoning all of you on the last day of my presidential term. So when you talk about the danger of setting a precedent when it comes to pardoning the innocent, we may now see a never-ending cycle of all administrations, good law-abiding administrations like the Biden administration, and, dirty, constitutional violating, law-ignoring administrations like Trump's last administration. And here we go again. Both administrations will have their own reasons for delivering, a whole bunch of prophylactic pardons to folk who committed no crimes or who did commit crimes, but you're pretending they didn't. Talk about the precedential downside to these, pardons of the innocent. Pin number 3. Joe Biden wrestled with, appropriately so, I would have wrestled with it too, wrestled with the notion that pardons are an indication of guilt. Pardons are an indication that the person being pardoned committed a crime. That's why he or she needs a pardon. It's to, avoid accountability for that crime. And we're already hearing Republican politicians, yelling and screaming and posting, this proves that all of these folks that Joe Biden just pardoned committed crimes. And so as we read in that CNN article, Joe Biden wrestled mightily with the notion that if I pardon these people, it's going to look like they committed crimes. And the folks who are now making these claims actually have some support, even if it's only specious support, kind of looks good on the surface, but there's no there, but they have some support from the Supreme Court. Because more than 100 years ago, back in 1915, the Supreme Court decided the case of Burdick versus the United States, and in it, they said flat out that a pardon carries with it an imputation of guilt, and accepting a pardon is at least some confession of guilt. So the folks who want to claim that by President Biden giving these folks pardons, there's an imputation of guilt, and if they accept the pardons, it's some confession of guilt, they've got some support in the Supreme Court ruling back in 1915. So President Biden, wrestled with that issue and said, look, I am confident these people did no wrong, committed no crimes, so nobody should interpret these pardons as carrying an imputation of guilt or accepting the pardons being any confession of guilt. So friends, these pardons of the innocent feel right. They feel righteous. They feel like the moral, decent, honorable thing to do. But as we just discussed, how much protection does it really provide to the people being pardoned? And there is significant precedential downside if we go about pardoning the innocent. Now let's finish up by talking about the flip side of the pardoning the innocent coin. Let's just use Liz Cheney as an example. If Liz Cheney was not pardoned, or if President Biden offered her a pardon and she refused to accept it, and then she was vindictively prosecuted by Donald Trump and his dirty Department of Justice that he has vowed to build, I will be your retribution. Remember, he said that. If a prosecution was brought against Liz Cheney that was vindictive, that was baseless, that was nefarious, that was in bad faith, that had no admissible evidence, no reliable evidence of criminal conduct by Liz Cheney, you know what would happen? I spent decades in the courts of Washington, D.C., and I have great respect and admiration for the federal trial court judges on the federal bench in Washington, D.C. They will be a bulwark against Donald Trump and his dirty DOJ, should he try to put together a dirty DOJ, bringing vindictive, bad faith, baseless prosecutions. They will be a bulwark. And in a figurative sense, I would expect the trial court judges in Washington, D.C. to cram down the throats of Donald Trump and his dirty DOJ officials any vindictive, bad faith, nefarious, baseless prosecution they try to cram through the courts. And friends, there is value, real value, in one co-equal branch of government, the judicial branch, standing up and announcing very publicly that vindictive prosecutions will not be successfully run through the courts, not of Washington, D.C. or anywhere else. And you know, maybe, if we can see all that with our own eyes in these public proceedings, maybe that will begin to rebuild and restore the public's faith and confidence in our institutions of government that Donald Trump has so desperately tried to tear down, to undermine. So yes, I do expect the federal courts to stay strong. I'm not going to touch the Supreme Court, where cases ultimately end up. But cases that are dismissed for lack of evidence or because they were brought vindictively or in bad faith, those kind of decisions are extraordinarily unlikely to make it up to the Supreme Court. I know. Have you seen the Supreme Court? I just heard Justice Clarence Thomas say, "Hold my beer." But discussion for another day. And then the second thing I strongly suspect would happen if Donald Trump's DOJ tried to bring bad faith, vindictive, baseless prosecutions against Trump's enemies is many of the men and women of the Department of Justice. Donald Trump's going to try to hollow it out, but he will not be all that successful, I don't believe. The good men and women of the Department of Justice, 110,000 strong, many of them will stand up to Kash Patel or Pam Bondi. I'm hoping the best, but expecting the worst from Pam Bondi if she becomes Attorney General. They will stand up and say, no, we will not be part of vindictive prosecutions to satisfy Donald Trump's appetite for revenge. And if you can get the judicial branch of government standing up and you can get the executive branch of government, the many good men and women at the Department of Justice standing up to lawlessness and overreach and unconstitutional conduct, that has value. That has real value. And I would like to see that value in the full light of day rather than giving pardons to the innocent and never having the judicial branch or the executive branch have to stand up to Donald Trump's lawlessness. Now listen, it is no small task for Liz Cheney or anybody else to have to defend against vindictive prosecutions, even though she would win at the end of the day, and exposing it would be important for the health of our democracy moving forward. I don't wish it on anybody, but as we've already discussed, even if she can't be prosecuted, she can be audited, she can be criminally investigated, she can be dragged through Congress. So there's lots of vindictive, back alleys Donald Trump can order his people to go down to make Liz Cheney's life a living hell. The prosecution piece is just one part of it that, yes, she will be protected from if she is given and accepts a pardon. That was a lot to go through. That was a lot to unpack. But friends, let's end with this. Today we are celebrating, or tomorrow if you're watching this video on Tuesday, but today, as I record it, we are celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And one of my favorite quotes, probably my single favorite quote from Martin Luther King Jr. is that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We have to keep bending the arc. And I don't feel like beginning the practice of pardoning the innocent, or administration after administration, which I think is likely to happen moving forward, I don't think that keeps the arc bending in the right direction. I think it's an unwise and unhelpful detour in that bending of the arc, and we all have to keep fighting like hell every day to bend that arc toward justice. Because justice matters. Friends, please stay safe. Please stay tuned. And I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.